Okay, so I didn't really do a daily video today, and this seemed like the most appropriate time to do the Q&A video that I've been planning on doing for like 2 weeks. So about 2 weeks ago, I asked on my YouTube community, my Patreon, and on Instagram if anyone had any random questions for me to do a Q&A. And up until this point, I just haven't found a place to put it in. I've been doing so much stuff, shooting so much, traveling a lot, being around other people, socializing, that a lot of the days have just been filled with really good stuff. So I haven't had a need for this, where I just needed to not film anything and just do the Q&A. So that is now. So I'm just going to go through a couple of questions that people have asked me. I'm going to start with Patreon. If you're interested, Patreon link down below. I really appreciate all you guys that are supporting me on Patreon. It means the world to me. And yeah, so thank you. All right, the first question is, Levi asked, who is my biggest inspiration? You know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't necessarily know, if we're talking just photography, I don't necessarily know if I have like a specific inspiration. I know that when I first started photography, it was people like Ted Gore, Nick Page, Mark Adamus, you know, just your typical like very dreamscapey images. But I think my photography has changed a lot since then, and I don't necessarily know if I gravitate towards that work anymore. But if we're just talking inspiration in life in general, probably my grandparents, my parents, you know, all of those typical people that really were there to support me. My dad was literally my biggest fan. Actually, I will still go to old F-Stoppers articles before he passed away, and I'll go to, and my dad had nothing, he didn't know left from right in a camera, but he just cared about what I was doing. And I'll still go to old F-Stoppers articles, and he signed up on an account and would just comment on my articles telling me how proud he was of me. And I found one of those a few months ago just on accident, and it just killed me in a good way. It was like, you know, I was referencing an old article, and I scrolled down, and I was like, oh, of course my dad commented on this 4 years ago. But anyways, that would be my biggest inspiration outside of photography. How do you do the camera shots as you're driving? They're out the front, along the sides, and the songs were very well selected. Where are they from? The camera shots are mostly all just shot on my phone, so stabilization on my iPhone is insanely good, just naturally. Almost all of them are shot on my phone. Actually, all of them are shot on my phone. I don't really think I've shot any of the driving shots with another camera. If I showed you what those look like, they would look like garbage. They are just shaky, vibrating, terrible shots. Phone is where it's at for that, weirdly enough. And then to answer your question about music, I actually think I'm going to do a whole episode on this. I get some of my music from Epidemic Sound, and I get some of my music from Artlist. I pay for those every year, so I'm actually spending a decent amount of money to have access to more music. But I really feel like music is a very important part of these daily videos and the way that I create these videos, and I don't want it to get stagnant. So sometimes I spend hours searching for new music on there that's older, that I haven't found or anything like that, that just really fits what my ears want to hear. And I try to limit. So I'm super into music, if you haven't found that out via other videos that I've done. But I try to limit to things that are easier to listen to, and that what everyone would end up liking, or could at least listen to while they watch. Maybe they're not necessarily going out of their way to like the music. So I definitely think there's a full video there, but I'm going to reach out to both of those companies and see if they want to work together for that video. What's the story, or Andrew asked, what's the story behind my car's name and my custom plates? Answer that question. Rocinante is what my name of the car is, but Ross is short for that, because saying Rocinante all the time would be difficult. And while it is a Don Quixote reference, it's also a Rush reference. So they have a song called Cygnus X1, and in that there is a rocket named Rocinante. And yes, if you happen to watch, what is it called, The Expanse, yes, the name of the rocket in that is Rocinante. And yes, before you ask, it is inspired by that Rush song, just like my car's name. In terms of the plates, YYZ Rush is also a Rush reference. I've had Rush plates since I could drive, so my dad had literally just Rush in Florida, and I had Rush too. I'm named after Rush. It's a long story, but that's where the names come from. At one point, you told us I was trained as an electrical engineer. When did you pivot to photography, and what motivated or pushed me towards landscape photography in particular? So I got a degree in electrical engineering, and I never used it. I spent 6 years in college, got my degree, and then I was filming and photographing bands at the time with a friend, and I didn't want to give all of that up. I talked about that in this episode if you want more info on that. And so I just kept working and kept doing that, and I just never ended up using the degree. I will say, in terms of landscape photography, I really didn't start shooting until 2016-ish. But even then, my work was subpar, and it wasn't until 2017 that I think 2017 was the year that I took photos that I would still have in my portfolio now. To answer your question there. And how did I pivot? I think that's a long form answer, but realistically, it was just that I didn't want to shoot people anymore, and I found a lot of therapy in landscape photography, and I just started working towards that. Aras asks, can I explain my mustache and what inspired to grow one, and why did the goatee go away? No, I cannot explain it. Stu asks, what does success look like for me? Well, I talked about that in this episode, and I think that answer changes sometimes. So sometimes I think I would feel more successful if I was making enough money to live the life that I want to live, or that I wasn't feeling like I'm just draining everything possible. Some days success is just snapping a great landscape photo. And other days success is connecting with people that I met through photography, like I did last week. So I think success kind of changes, and I think reality is, like, if I'm finding happiness, that's step number one. And then step number two is sustaining that level of life, which is usually monetary. So figuring out how I can keep that happiness while also keeping food on the table, or gas in Ross. Justin asked, a while back I asked 70-200 versus 100 to whatever, and you answered 70-200. Now that I own both, because I own the 70-200 and the 100-500, has that changed? Absolutely not. 70-200 all the way. I think that's the lens I shoot on the most. It's still my favorite lens. I think I'm going to make a video on the 100-500. I've taken some really nice photos with it recently, but I still think that it's such a niche camera for landscape photography that I can't justify keeping it. Although it's going to be hard for me to get rid of, because I took these two photos during the fall color change in Colorado that I really love, and I wouldn't have been able to capture without the 100-500. So it's one of those things where, yes, it gives me a few extra photos here and there, but is it worth keeping? I haven't fully figured that out yet. How has the balance of photography and videography been? Great. I mean, I will say, when I used to shoot more long-form videos that were weekly, I definitely feel like my photography suffered because I was so focused on creating better videos. Now I feel like I try not to let that get in my way, and filming on my phone a lot means that it doesn't get in my way as much, and it means that I can just tell a story and take the photos that I want to take. And there's some times where I just won't film. I will prioritize the photos more than anything, and maybe film later, or just not even include it in the episode. So that's an answer to that question. Have you thought about collaborating with any other photographers on your journeys? Of course. I really don't have any photography friends up until last week. I just didn't have any people in the space shooting photos besides Ryan. And the only reason I met Ryan is he reached out to me, and we met up in Oregon, and then we became friends, and then he drove to Alaska, and we spent more time together. So he really put a lot of that effort in for it to happen. I am either really bad at it, or it's the fact that I can't really plan anything ahead of time, and a lot of people need that, hey, I'll be available on Friday to Sunday, when can you be here? And I just don't live that life currently, so it's very hard. Any images on the Alaska trip that you almost deleted and are glad that I didn't? Well, I don't usually ever delete images unless they're just like completely blurry, out of focus. So I don't really have an answer to that one. And honestly, I have so many photos that I still haven't even gone back to edit some of the ones that I do like. So noticing the ones that I didn't like, I don't know. Best non-photography related experience on the trip. I think the Arctic Ocean. I really didn't take any photos up there, but saying I got to go there and experience it and see it was really cool. I think that that's something that very little people get the chance to do, is drive to the Arctic Ocean, and I think that that was one of the things that I got to experience and talk about that was just absolutely amazing, even though I really didn't take any photos of the Arctic Ocean. All right, next question. Could you please share your experience shooting landscapes in harsh sunlight? I mean, that's a really long-form answer. If you want, there's plenty of videos here where I do shoot in harsh sunlight. A few days ago, I shot in the fall color change. I used some foliage in front of me, and that was super harsh light. I'll put the photo on the screen now, so you can check out that episode if you want to. I mean, that's a really tough question to answer in, this amount of time. So I think just watching videos and seeing what I do when it is harsh light is the best way to answer that question. Dahlia asks, how do you film myself while I'm outside shooting? I find it so difficult. Practice. Just doing it all the time. At first, if you go back and watch my episodes from 2020 in the fall color change in Colorado, I am really bad at talking to the camera. I have very little energy and just articulate ideas and stuff really poorly, and I'm actually surprised anyone watched those videos at all. And as you can tell, it's pretty beautiful. And I'm just scouting some more locations. The conditions, both for sunrise and right now, are not very good. Instead of taking a big landscape, I wanted to get a little more intimate, even on the 24mm side. I am trying to cut the sky out of the shot just because it's blue, and I really just want to get the forest floor and the trees in the shot. What it's really going to test is, if you notice, there's still a huge amount of dynamic range. It's just practice. I think that forcing myself to film these videos and talk about photography as I'm doing them, it just gets way easier. And I know that that's not there's not like a step 1 through 5 to get better at it. Just doing it and failing at it and doing it and failing at it and doing it, and then watching yourself back and just noticing it. But I also just think talking to a camera all the time really does help. Is creating an LLC worth the trouble to a photographer? I read somewhere, blah, 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 blah. I can't answer that question, to be honest with you. I don't know. I think an LLC is good to have regardless. I think at the very least it's good to have, especially if you're working with other people like brands or photographers. Sorry, if you're running workshops and you're also working with brands, it's just good to have. If you're making the majority of your money selling prints and stuff like that, maybe you don't necessarily need it. But honestly, I don't listen to legal advice from me because I don't know. Andrew asks, ever thought about getting a vehicle with a bit more space like a van? Absolutely. I think about that all the time because I think the most limiting thing about the way I live is the fact that I can't work in my vehicle very much. Like, I really need some kind of desk or coffee shop or office space to do what I want to do, and I think about a van a lot, but then I also think about the sacrifices that I would have to make. I would not be nearly as stealthy, I would not be able to park in some of the places I've parked and slept, and I would not be able to get to some of the places that I've been able to get to. So at this point, I probably won't switch, and maybe down the line, sometime in the future in my life, I'll do a van. I'm not entirely sure. Candy asks, what gets you through the long days of driving? That's a great question. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's a lot of thinking to myself, sometimes it's sinking all of my time into ideas about videos, ways I can improve not only my photos, but also my business, ideas about things I could sell or things I could offer to people, ideas about different topics that I could talk about in videos. Because as much as these videos, when you watch them from start to finish, yes, they are encapsulating what happens during the day. But there are days where I come up with ideas to talk about, or I come up with things that I want to discuss in a video, and sometimes I have to formulate those ideas. A great example is when I talked about the Sufjan Stevens album. I've been thinking about what I wanted to say about that album for like over a week. So that really all comes to a head when I sit in front of a camera and end up talking about it. Have I planned out the route to Argentina? No, I have not. It's a pretty generic route. Once you cross into South America, there's like basically one route, and your options are mostly just through Mexico and Central America, but I haven't planned any of that yet. What kind of heating system do I have in my car? Tips for cold weather camping. I have no heating system. Blankets. I've slept in -10, which I believe is -23 degrees Celsius, so -10 Fahrenheit. That's the coldest I've slept in, and I wouldn't recommend it on a daily basis. I can get away on a daily basis getting from like single digits to teens pretty easily, but it's still not fun to wake up in that every day. So normally I'll just follow the weather and try to sleep in the desert during the winter, which is what I will be doing this winter. What's your motivation to be working on the road? It just enables me to get out there and take photos more often. So instead of being tied into renting a place or whatever and having to go on trips, I can just be wherever I want to be, and I'm always taking photos if I want to be taking photos. And it really just enables me to make more, honestly, it's just more interesting content. If I lived in a house again and just traveled for trips, it would be very difficult for me to make daily videos, let alone make weekly videos where I'm pushing myself to go shoot the Front Range or something, like when I used to live in Denver. And now I just get to experience more of the world and more of what I'm doing. And it puts me where I can wake up and shoot sunrise right where I wake up. And that's a big one, because waking up for sunrise when you don't have that is very difficult on a daily basis. Did I have to swap out fluids, tires, etc. driving through different climates? No, I did not. That's not a problem. All-terrain tires and all the fluids and stuff, totally fine. I didn't go anywhere crazy. If I had stayed in Alaska for the winter, then it would have been a different story, but I didn't. Have I had any problems on the road with my 4Runner? I have not, thankfully. Knock on wood. There's no wood around here, so knock on wood. Favorite place in Canada and favorite place in the States? Favorite place in Canada? Well, I haven't visited all that much of Canada, but I will definitely say that I really loved Whitehorse. That whole area was super nice. Now, obviously, that's not necessarily a photo area, but it was interesting. And being able to go up to Tombstone and see all of that was really cool. I would say, I think if I had to like pick a photography spot, it was definitely the Salmon Glacier in Stewart. That place was amazing. Not only that, I just didn't know it was there the first time I went. So it was like this really surreal experience where you're just driving and I just discover, I talk about it in the episode if you want to watch it here. What's the most underrated or surprisingly photographic place I've ever been? Florida. I'm from Florida, and funny enough, I think the prints I've sold the most are from Florida. So there's the answer to that. What do I miss most about Colorado and why is it Rufus? Well, this is Rufus, and Maggie is asking this question, who is Rufus' owner, and it's definitely Rufus, so you already answered it. Which camera and lens should a beginner be selecting, and also any online courses? I would start with a phone. I know I always say this, but I really think you can get away learning a lot about photography with a phone, and even you'll be, well, maybe it'll come out before this episode or after this episode, but my iPhone 14 Pro versus my camera will really show you how far you can push your camera if you want to learn photography and also editing. In terms of online courses, I don't know which ones are great for beginners. I never really did that. I just kind of shot and watched YouTube videos when I was learning. I think you could probably do that yourself, but if you're more of a structured person and want an online course, there's a lot of great ones on f-stoppers. They're definitely pricey, but I think they're worth it if that's something you want to do. I'm not necessarily sure about beginners. Again, what do you want to do? What do you want to shoot? Want to shoot landscapes? You want to shoot people? It all depends on that. So those were all the questions I got, so thank you for asking those, and thank you for tuning in to watching all of this if you ended up sticking around to this point. As always, you can like the video if you liked it, consider subscribing if you loved it, and I will see you tomorrow. Probably going to do some daily vlogging, and we're definitely going to shoot some nightlife here in Vegas. I just was too exhausted the last couple days, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you then.